All right. It's now set up. Let's get back to the other tab and tap the Zoom button just a little bit more. All right, we'll just wait a minute for people to log in. I hope everybody appreciated last week that due to a funeral, I wasn't able to hold class as usual. You can always go back and look for my older videos on Noah if you were really desperate to hear something about Noah from me, but thankfully it is a well-studied area. Today, we are going to be looking at Lech Lecha, which is also very well-studied. And we'll be looking at one of the famous incidents in Lech Lecha, that there are many, because this is the story of Avram and Sarai, soon to be known as Abraham and Sarah. And I will apologize if I switch back and forth between their names. Officially here, they are just Avram and Sarai, but soon enough, they'll be Abraham and Sarah, and that's the usual way we talk about them in general study. So if I switch back and forth, don't be too surprised. And this episode that we're going to be looking at is one of the first real encounters with danger or crisis that Avram and Sarai are going to be facing. Very famously, it is said that Abraham faces 10 trials throughout his life and his relationship with God. And this is definitely part of that set. No one ever said that the lives of the patriarchs and matriarchs were always peaceful and idyllic. That's not what it means when we have a covenant with God. It's not what we mean when we have a relationship with God. God never guarantees a bed of roses, as they say. But of course, we have to work out what was going on, how did Avram and Sarai deal with it, and whether or not their methodology was appropriate. If you don't know, I'm just going to give a little bit of a spoiler now. Avram and Sarai are going to pretend to be brother and sister as they go down into the land of Egypt. And that is going to cause quite a kerfuffle in that situation. And so we're going to be uncovering why they did that, how it was revealed, and what that is trying to teach us about the nature of Avram and Sarai, about this whole section, and of course of lessons for ourselves in our own relationships, not only if we are in a crisis and fleeing to Egypt. All right, with that much of a soft introduction, let's go ahead and get to the formal study. We are picking up now in Bereshit 12, Genesis chapter 12. As always, we are studying here from the Sefaria text, this time drawing from the Fox translation, which has a bit more of a poetic capturing of the Hebrew itself. I find it also is very useful when studying because it will often capture the roughness of the text, the incongruities, the things that will generate conversation and investigation as they are meant to. So here we are in chapter 12, and we'll be beginning in verse 10. Now, there was a famine in the land. Now, this is a little bit of a kick in the teeth. Abraham and Sarai have only just arrived in the land of what's then known as Canaan. And this has been promised as being a place of blessing, and they will have this wonderful covenant that goes forward, and the land will be their eternal possession. And boom, apparently they just moved in and the roof is already leaking. Or rather not leaking, because there was a famine, which usually was because of a shortage of rainfall in the ancient world. So they've come in, they've settled and been given the assurances by God, and now they are facing the first pressure that all people faced at different points in ancient history: what to do when the land around you is not producing enough food. Now remember, at this point, Avram and Sarai are really very much in the shepherding business. They are tending to the flocks, and that is their primary mode of business. And That means the usual idea would be they would either sell the sheep or sell the wool or other products like, the milk or cheese to those that grow on the farms, and there would be an exchange. Well, if the farms are not producing enough food, then they don't have anything to sell the shepherds either. So that means you need to take your bank account, your flocks, and move somewhere else. So that is exactly what Avram is going to do. And Avram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was heavy in the land. So we get bookends on verse 10. There was a famine, and the famine was heavy. It is reminding us that indeed the famine was heavy, which is perhaps trying to explain why Avram is taking the surprising step of leaving the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, to go elsewhere. He has just arrived. He's just been promised this land, and now he is already leaving it. It seems a little strange. As Fox translates, Vayered, he is going down to the land of Egypt. As a matter of course, the Torah always refers going up to Israel as Allah, as making aliyah. And if you leave the land of Israel, it is yerida, it is descending, you are going down. It doesn't matter whether you're going from Israel to Mount Everest, you're still going down. It doesn't matter whether you're going from Mount Everest to Israel, you're still going up. And that is a terminology that continues into modern Hebrew and Jewish discussion and to this day. We also get to this great word, lagur, that Avram is going to sojourn there. Now, I don't know about you, but the only time I come across the phrase sojourn is when I'm reading older translations of biblical works. And that's because we don't use that term in modern English, well, as far as I know, ever. It's one of those words that simply dropped off the map. But it is a very useful word and one that has a very particular meaning. You might have said he went there to stay or he went there to live. But in English, both of those would have the wrong connotation. Stay could mean temporary or could mean permanent. And live, of course, might just be that this is a desperate life-saving activity, or that he is going to move there to live as a more permanent settlement. So too, the phrase settle would also be an issue. Sojourn in English and lagur in the Hebrew is very much capturing a temporary relocation, that there is no expectation that the person will become a permanent resident, but that this is a limited move. It would be called being a migrant in the modern world in the technical definition of the word, as opposed to an immigrant, which is a more permanent long stay. Indeed, the phrase lagur is the same root that we get the word ger, which means stranger. He is essentially making himself a stranger in the land of Egypt. He knows that he has no claim to that land, and yet he is going there because he is hoping to be able to work something out whereby he will not starve to death. Verse 11. If I could wake my mouse up. It was when he came near to Egypt that he said to Sarai, his wife, "Now here I know that you are a woman beautiful to look at. It will be when the Egyptians see you and say, 'She is his wife,' that they will kill me, but you they will allow to live. Pray say that you are my sister, in order that it may go well with me on your account, and I myself may live thanks to you." All right, so Avram is worried. He is worried because as they are approaching the border of Egypt, he's looking at his wife and going, they're going to think you're really beautiful. Now, remember, she's quite old at this point, but nevertheless, he is claiming that she is so beautiful that it becomes dangerous to be her husband, that the Egyptians are likely to simply kill him and take her. That sort of behavior was not uncommon in the ancient world. It's unfortunately not all that uncommon even in the modern world, depending upon where you live. And he is worried that her very beauty will become a liability, that the lawlessness of Egypt will mean that because she is so attractive, it will be worth their while to go ahead and murder him and simply take her. So he comes up with a plan. Say that you are my sister. Now, you might be wondering, how is having her be his sister any better than her being his wife? Well, the implication seems to be that by calling her his sister, that what he is going to prevent is a cause to murder him. That although the Egyptians might be willing to murder a husband to steal the wife, they would not see the need to murder a brother to steal the sister, but instead would simply engage in the normal practice of the ancient world of plying the brother with gifts and encouraging him to allow them to marry the sister, and then everyone gets what they want and they go their happy way. Now, if a little alarm bells are already going off in your head, that this plan seems a little perilous, you're right. There's a lot of things that could go wrong here. I'm sure that some of you are thinking them up yourself, but let me go ahead and save the time and list them for you. So first of all, they could kill him anyway, because why should they ply the brother when they could just murder him? Two, if they begin negotiations, then the implication, of course, is that she will eventually consummate those negotiations with someone else, whoever is the agreed upon suitor that has convinced the brother to allow him to marry his sister. Well, that would be a problem, wouldn't it, for Sarah to actually go to someone else's house to become someone else's wife? Well, that may save Abraham's life, but Sarai would then be committing adultery, and as would her husband, new husband, unknowingly. So while that might be okay for Avram, who then would only have just lied, it would be much less ideal for her, who is now in the midst of what Judaism will eventually classify as one of the three cardinal sins that we do not transgress, even at the cost of our own life. We don't commit public idolatry, we don't murder, and we don't engage in sexual immorality, even if threatened with death. So it would seem to be that Avram is willing to sacrifice her protection for his own. That's problematic. But let's see how it plays out. We're in verse 14. It was when Avram came to Egypt that the Egyptians saw how exceedingly beautiful the woman was. Indeed, he was right. Pharaoh's courtiers saw her, and they praised her to Pharaoh. So the woman was taken away into Pharaoh's house. All right, so not only does she get noticed as beautiful, and not only does word spread that she's beautiful, and the whole process of courtship begins, but it ends up with Pharaoh himself being the one doing the courting. That is another flaw in Avram's plan. What happens if somebody powerful enough to force you to accept their offer engages in this courtship process of the ancient world? How are you going to say no? And apparently he can't say no, which is why in verse 15, she is taken. But in verse 16, now it went well with Avram on her account, just like he anticipated. Sheep and oxen, donkeys, servants and maids, she-asses and camels became his. He gets promoted. He gets put in a position of wealth and of status for being the brother-in-law of the newest woman to be added into Pharaoh's household. And we can be happy that Pharaoh is so generous, but we can also recognize that Avram is just kind of sold his wife. And that should make us a little uncomfortable. It certainly does the commentaries. Verse 17, but Adonai plagued Pharaoh with great plagues, and also his household, because of Sarai, Avram's wife. Now, we don't get much detail of exactly what the plagues are, but the upshot here that we're focusing on is that both Pharaoh and his household are now suffering because, unbeknownst to them, they have taken into their midst someone else's wife. Pharaoh had Avram called and said, "What have you done to me? Why did you not tell me that she is your wife? The Midrash tried to explain that it was revealed to Pharaoh the cause was because of Sarai and the fact that she was actually the wife. And so Pharaoh confronts Avram over this point. Why did you say she is my sister? So I took her for myself as a wife. But now here is your wife. Take her and go. So Pharaoh put men in charge of him who escorted him and his wife and all that was his. And the next chapter, they are back up in the land of Canaan, having overcome the period of famine. So Pharaoh does not punish Avram for this, probably because he already saw Adonai's power in protecting Sarai and punishing Pharaoh's household. So he's not interested in messing with that if he can avoid it. And now Avram comes away with the goodies that he got and his wife, and the implication being, of course, that she has also not been harmed in any way during this ordeal, except certainly traumatized by being taken into someone else's household and thinking of what was possible to happen to her at any moment. All right, I'm going to sort of pause there before we get into our commentaries and see if anyone has any questions. I have to go switch to the other tab. Not seeing any text flying up. All right, so let's get down to our commentary, because our commentary has to really wrestle with this issue. The one right at the beginning is where we're going to focus, which is Avram making this plan. Avram saying, pretend to be my sister. You're so beautiful. I'm a dead man if I walk into that place with you. But if they think that I'm your brother, then we might be able to get out of this. And when I say we, I mean me, because I'm not sure how we're going to handle this. And really putting the onus on Sarai's shoulders, that she is the one who will have to lie most openly and say, that's my brother. And she is the one who is going to have to go along with whatever marriage fiasco is being perpetrated. Because if she doesn't, then Avram will be killed. So despite all of that, that is to say that she is really the focus, it does seem that it's focused on him. The text itself is focused on him, which is what Chizkuni starts with. As soon as Avram came to Egypt, according to the plain meaning of the text, it sounds as if all the people in the entourage are considered as merely as an appendage to Avram, his fate dominating what would happen to all the people who had traveled to Egypt with him. What Chizkuni is picking up is the fact that when he gets to Egypt, that it is in the singular verb, right? Kivo Avram, that when Abraham or Avram came to Egypt, it's not when they got to Egypt. Even an ambiguous pronoun as they, which could be him and Sarai, who he was just talking to, or whether it's the entirety of his entourage, because remember, he came to Canaan with a whole group of people. It still is all focused as though it was just him. And that seems to be implying that everyone else was just an appendage, as Chizkuni puts it. Further, confirmation of this approach to the text is what we read in verse 10, when Avram is described as descending to Egypt in the singular also, which sounds as if he alone had traveled to Egypt, although we know that Lot was with him. Even if you don't want to consider Sarai and the servants as being of status to join him in the conjugation of the verb to make it plural, certainly Lot, who he is going to have a lot of dealings with very shortly, would deserve to be mentioned. And certainly he could be part of that verb as being a plural, and yet he's not. Likewise, we see Rashi pointing this out. And when it came to pass, when Avram was come into Egypt, now that's our verse, but it should have said when they were come into Egypt. Again, the plural would have been more correct by the number of people, but the use of the single teaches us that he hid her in a chest. And when they demanded the custom dues, they opened it and discovered her. So what Rashi is saying, based off Genesis Rabbah, is that the singular verb was not a mistake, nor was it just, as Chizkuni hints, that it was just to make everyone else an appendage. it was because it wanted to say Sarai was hidden when they arrived. Now, this is answering one of the questions that almost every student has ever asked, which is, if there was a danger that Sarai would be so beautiful that she would bring death upon Avram, why not just hide her? Why not just, stick her somewhere where she wouldn't show up? And indeed, that is exactly what the Midrash says Avram did. He wasn't a dummy. He didn't just hope that things would go well. He did hide her. However, when they got to the border and the border agents searched the baggage because they had to do a customs check in order to pay the taxes, they opened the box and there was Sarai. And now the word gets out that she is beautiful. And thus the story begins to unfold. This story of her being revealed as being beautiful is one that the Zohar picks up and tries to, teach us a little extra about. And it came to pass, when Avram came to Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman that she was very fair. That phrase is as strong of a compliment as you're likely to find. Rabbi Yehuda said, he brought her to Egypt in a closed carriage, again, echoing the idea of her being in some sort of hidden container. And the Egyptians opened the carriage to collect taxes from it. But as the carriage was opened, there was light resembling the light of the sun, meaning that she was shining. She was so beautiful. What does it mean by very? It didn't just say she was attractive. It says that she was very attractive, me'od. The Egyptians saw in the carriage a different light. That is to say, the light was not just a normal type of light. This is something that was exceptional. It was even more than you would expect. They took her out and they saw that she remained as fair as before. They considered maybe it was only bright and beautiful because of the splendor of the carriage. Maybe it was the traveling that she had that made her look that way. Nope, take her out of the carriage and she was still gorgeous. Therefore, it is written, the ministers of Pharaoh saw her. Since it is written, the Egyptians beheld the women already, why do I read the ministers saw her, which seems redundant? Because they took her out of the carriage and saw that she remained as fair as before, and then they commended her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. So the Zohar was trying to spell out the narrative for us, that she was locked away. The first lowly people opened up the carriage or baggage and saw her. When they removed her, the ministers then saw her. When they saw her, they then told Pharaoh about her, and the story continues in motion. So we get this whole flow that's happening because of this. Now, is me'od and yafa, is this really the highest praise we can give? Well, thankfully, the Talmud tells us, yes, this is a fairly striking use of term. I know that yafa me'od is not considered like the highest praise in modern Hebrew, and very attractive is not like singing someone's praises to the mountains. But as the Talmud explains, the chapter closes with an explication of the verse stated with regards to Abishag, who attended King David before his death, remembering that she was the woman who kept him warm when he was very, very old as his servant. And the damsel, Abishag, was very fair, yafa ad me'od. Notice the addition of the word ad. Rabbi Hanina Bar Papa says, she still did not reach half the beauty of Sarah, as it is written, ad me'od, which can be translated as up to very fair. That word ad can often be used as just meaning up to or until, but only up to very fair, but not including the praise of very fair. She was yafa ad me'od, not yafa me'od, right? She was very nearly very beautiful, but not actually very beautiful. So the Sanhedrin is trying to tell us that if you want to understand how beautiful Sarai was, you have to realize that Avishag, who was considered to be the most beautiful woman available to be brought in to help King David and in his old age, which would have been one of the most prestigious and honorable positions that a person could have, and one that certainly they would have found the most attractive woman in the entirety of David's kingdom to perform that duty. Nevertheless, she was not nearly as beautiful as Sarai. So it's a nice little bit of word deconstruction to try and help us understand just how beautiful this phrase Yafa Me'od can mean, even if it doesn't sound like much to us in our modern languages. Okay, but we are still also going to have to wrestle with a very interesting little twist, which, going back to our text, there we are, in verse 11, that as Fox translates it, now here, hine na, right? Now, behold, now, many different ways to put it, yadati. Now I know that you are a woman beautiful to look at. Well, what do you mean now? What do you mean, like, just now? And he said to Sarah, his wife, behold, now I know that you are fair, a fair woman to look upon. The Zohar asks, could it be that until then Abraham did not know she was a fair woman to look upon? I mean, come on. How long have they been married? This has already been explained, that he did not look upon the image of Sarah because of their excessive modesty with each other. But when he came near to enter Egypt, she revealed herself and he saw her. So the Zohar is sharing a tradition that Avram and Sarai were so modest, were so careful, especially about the Yetzer Hara, that they did not fully reveal their beauty to one another for fear that that would dominate the relationship, that would become the primary mode of expressing their love with each other. And now, as they are approaching the border, Avram is forced to consider her more objectively, meaning how will others who objectify women look at her, and what dangers will that pose? Up until now, he saw her as his companion, as his partner, as his wife, in all of the non-objectificational ways. I'm not sure if that's English, but let's go with it anyway. But now here at the border, he has to do a more objective appraisal of what are the other people in Egypt, which is known for its immorality, going to make of you? What are they? If I have to put myself in the Egyptians' shoes, what are they going to think when they see you? And when he does that, it hits him. She's dangerously beautiful. It wasn't the way that he related to her before now. It wasn't the way that he focused on her. They didn't marry her just for her looks. But now that he is stepping back and saying, if I were a lecherous Egyptian, what would I think if I saw Sarai walk into the room? Now he's afraid. And that is what is forcing him, perhaps in a panic, to then come up with this scheme of hiding her in something or passing her off as a sister, because he is really coming to grips with just how dangerous it's going to be for him to be traveling with someone that is going to attract so much attention among people that are known for doing things that are not right when they have focused their attention on someone. Okay, before we move into a sort of second phase of analysis, any questions about that so far? Okay. Another explanation, because there's always more than one interpretation, even from the same book. And again, we are now back in the Zohar. Another explanation for why he knew is that most people are affected by the hardship of the journey. But Sarah remained beautiful and her appearance did not change. So why is it here now I see that you are beautiful? It's not that he didn't know she was beautiful before. Don't think that he never looked upon her and didn't appreciate the beauty that was hers. But instead, he is seeing her now as somebody who has traveled all the way across some of the roughest territory in that part of the world. And she's still gorgeous. And he is saying, even now, with all of the travel and the dirt and the grime and, dealing with camels and whatnot, even now you're still a knockout. And I'd kind of hope that maybe some of your luster would have worn off and the Egyptians wouldn't notice you coming in as being as beautiful as you are, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to notice you right away. So quick, into the box. That seems to be, or call yourself my sister. That seems to be the implication for this alternative explanation. But we have a third explanation from the Zohar itself of why here and now Avram is acknowledging the beauty. Another explanation of the words, behold, now I know, is that Avram saw the Shekhinah accompanying Sarah. But it's not just Sarai herself that Avram is noticing, but he is seeing the Shekhinah. A reminder, the Shekhinah is the term that's used in rabbinic literature for the most perceptible, palpable representation of God's presence. So when saying the Shekhinah, really, it's like saying the Spirit of God that is with her. For this reason, Avram felt confident and said, she is my sister. That probably seems like a non sequitur, but keep reading. The phrase my sister has two meanings. The first is literal, biological sister. The second is figurative, as in the verse, say to wisdom, you are my sister. All right, so now when Avram says, say you are my sister, he is looking over Sarai's shoulder to the Shekhinah with her, and that is what he is addressing when he says, say you are my sister, because that language echoes the terms of Mishle, the book of Proverbs, which there is referring to wisdom. Wisdom, of course, being the personification of all that God has tried to teach us through Torah, meaning of God itself. So by using this phrase, you are my sister, Avram is addressing it to the Shekhinah that is with Sarai, rather than Sarai herself. He's not asking her to lie, and that makes it all better. Now, obviously, this does not match what happens when Pharaoh finds out, but that is something that we often have to get used to whenever we are reading the interpretations of mystical literature, like the Zohar, that their interpretations are often meant for us to understand in situ, just for that particular verse or phrase, but not to pull together the entirety of a narrative, because it doesn't work well with the rest of the narrative to imagine that this was not being said also to Sarai. But if we focus on this as being his relationship with Shekhinah at that particular moment, then it makes a little more sense, because we are seeing Avram drawing faith and strength from the palpable presence of God as he stands at the threshold of a very dangerous situation, one that he is put in for a reason that a lesser man might have blamed God for. God, why did you bring me to a land that's only going to have a famine and force me to leave? Instead, we can see that Avram here is still putting his faith in God, despite being forced to be a sojourner in a dangerous situation. And in context, that makes perfect sense. It just doesn't quite fit the entirety of the narrative. It is also written, say, I pray you, you are my sister, the fuller verse from chapter 12. And it is also written, speak you to us, from Deuteronomy. In addressing the Shekhinah, he said, that it may be well with me for your sake, and also my soul shall live because of you. Because as a result of this, a person is elevated up to the path of life. By focusing on this, you are my sister, as being a direct address to the Shekhinah, we also hear echoes of Deuteronomy, of the notion that what truly makes the soul of a person, the nefesh of a person be well, obviously that is Torah and the relationship with God. We could and should, says the Zohar, read this as being about a higher level of relationship than even that between Sarai and Avram. Now, I know that the Zohar treatment is not something that everybody appreciates, enjoys, or agrees with. That's okay. As always, I bring multiple commentaries precisely because there are multiple voices within our tradition. However, even if you feel that this is more than a stretch and not substantiated by the texts in the Torah portion itself, please also appreciate the lesson that the Zohar is trying to teach. Even if you don't believe that lesson belongs to this particular text, recognize there is an inherent truth that we should be addressing God and addressing God's presence, the Shekhinah, the closest we can come to God, as being like our sister, that which is close to our heart and which we always seek to be near, and that we should recognize in that as being the source of what is good for us in our life. That remains true and the same, regardless of if you believe that is the most meaningful interpretation of chapter 12. All right, now we're going to finish off with two different takes on this. One is to criticize Avram, and the other is a more modern literary analysis. So let's begin with Rabbeinu Bachya's criticism of Avram. Well, really Ramban's, but he summarizes it in fewer words than Ramban does. This was an inadvertent sin committed by Avram. It caused the eventual exile in Egypt of his descendants. All right, what? Rabbeinu Bachya, based off Ramban, is saying that Avram's lie here and Avram's leaving of the land of Canaan is wrong. That it was entirely wrong. He should have stayed and he shouldn't have lied. It was certainly a grave sin to cause his wife to sin on account of his own fear of being killed. Like I said at the outset, the sin of sexual immorality, adultery being one of the prime examples of it, is one of the three that we should not violate, even at the risk of our own life. So really, asking someone else to go commit adultery, or at least potentially commit adultery, because you are afraid for yourself, is not a good path. This is not what Judaism teaches. As such, Avram has made a mistake in this particular case. He should have demonstrated faith in God that he would save him as well as his wife. Rather than believing that this was the likely outcome and that he had to take these matters in his own hands, he shouldn't have lied and trusted that when God said that he would be there with him, that for him and Sarai, God would be there and no lie and deception would be necessary. And he committed another sin when he left the land of Canaan on account of the famine. He should have demonstrated faith in God that he would make sure he would not die from hunger. On account of this sin, his descendants were enslaved by Pharaoh. This, at least, is the view of Ramban. And Rabbeinu Bachya has more to say, but that's the summation that I wanted to share. Now, the idea that the enslavement in Egypt would be in some ways a punishment, or at the very least an echo of this particular deception, is very striking. But I don't want to dwell on that too much. I want to focus instead on the fact that it is entirely permissible to criticize Avram's behavior in this episode. There is often a tendency towards hagiography of writing stories or interpreting stories of our ancestors as though they were flawless saints who never did anything wrong. And Avram himself has certainly demonstrated incredible piety and strength of faith. But it is also permissible to say, if he did what I think he did for the reason I think he did it, then that was wrong. Even if it turns out we were wrong about interpreting his behavior or motivation, certainly making sure that others know that he was wrong for putting his wife in this position is an important teaching for others who come after Avram, who shouldn't put their wives in that same position. And unfortunately, Jewish men and women have been in terrible positions throughout our history, and we wouldn't want them to be offering up their wives in some situation like this, where she would be forced to choose between committing adultery or allowing her husband to die. That's not the lesson we want drawn. And so we need to at least somehow criticize what Avram did, even if perhaps we're misreading his behavior, just to forestall others from behaving the way that a surface reading might have indicated. I know that's a little bit circuitous, but we have to criticize a little to make sure that no one gets the wrong idea here. And that notion of him putting her in jeopardy, him putting her in harm's way, while even at the same time leaving her out of the verbs, the conjugation, the list of people coming down into Egypt, definitely strikes a chord with some of the tension we find in this story. This particular story, as we're going to see here from Everett Fox's own commentary, is not the only version that we're going to see. So as Everett Fox explains, almost immediately upon his arrival in the Promised Land, Avram is forced to leave it. It will be his son Yitzchak's task to remain there on a more permanent basis. This is the first of 3 such stories, which are practically identical. See also chapters 20 and 26. By stories that are identical, what he is referring to are the stories of a husband and wife duo having to leave and then being mistaken for brother and sister rather than husband and wife, while in the domain of someone else that is less trustworthy. All pose a challenge for the interpreter. An honored man of God, in this case Avram, seeks to save his own skin by passing his wife off as a sister. In each case, the patriarch emerges safely and with increased wealth. So it works, but in each case, it's also the wife that is the primary risk taker in this escapade. The husband has nothing to lose because he thinks he'll die if he just shows up as husband. So at least there's a chance for him. But in the alternative, technically, if her husband was murdered, it would be better for the woman who was then taken, because at least she would not be in the midst of adultery by being forced to marry someone else after she had become a widow. Not that it would be great to be forced to be married against your will, obviously, but as far as the issues go within the broader story, technically, that would be a slightly better position for her than being forced to commit adultery while her husband was still alive and safely enjoying the fruits of having almost prostituted her out. So for the woman, she is in a worse position to try and save him. And for the man, there was almost nothing to lose and everything to gain. So how can we understand this in a more literary way? Well, Fox brings first one interpretation. Spicer has tried to use the analogy of Hurrian, that is to say from Haran law, in which a wife can be elevated to the status of sister as one element in the expansion of her status. The legal background, however, is unclear and may not be decisive here. So the idea here is that it is not unprecedented in looking at ancient Near Eastern law codes for a man to officially adopt his wife as a sister. Now, that sounds horrible and gross in the modern usage of the language, and I agree. But in the ancient world, a wife was just a wife. A sister was flesh and blood and connected to you by the bonds of flesh and blood, family and tribe. So by promoting a wife to be wife and sister, it was providing additional status and protection to her in the case that the husband died, or to prevent him from abusing her when he divorces her, that she would have a status that was more permanent and more protected. Not to say that we see anything like that in Jewish practice, but perhaps goes the argument that Avram was simply borrowing the laws of Haran, where he was from, and was sharing that with Sarai at this point, so that it wouldn't be technically a lie. She would be his sister while also being his wife. Now, as Fox points out, first of all, the legality of that and whether that truly was the way that it was implemented in that part of the Near East is questionable. And second of all, it doesn't seem to be exactly the point of the story in this part of Genesis. Instead, coming as it does after God's promise to biologically found a great nation through Avram, the story in its first version, meaning this section here in Egypt, is probably best understood as an example of God's protection, not only of the key male figure, but of the matriarch as well. Harming Sarai, or even the threat of violating her sexually, brings with it divine punishment. In addition, the story also enables Avram to expand his wealth, itself a sign of God's favor and the patriarch's importance or weightiness. Now, the idea of expanding his wealth, it's nice that even against the Pharaoh, he comes out on top. It is a wonderful way of showing the strength of God's support and what it can do for even a common person. But that initial argument that Fox is making, I think, is very telling, and one that I find is echoed in other portions of the Torah, that up till this point, Sarai has been a appendage, as Chizkuni mentioned. She has been an afterthought. There's been almost more discussion of Lot than there has been of Sarai, or at the very least about equal. So here we are seeing that we're not just saving Avram's skin, but Sarai as well is being saved. For indeed, Avram could have simply divorced her and said, fine, I'll just have to marry you off because there's no way I'm leaving here alive with you. And he could have become rich and he could have left, and Sarai would have remained behind in Pharaoh's household. Avram didn't do that, to his credit, and God protected Sarai to her credit as well, meaning that the covenant was not only with Avram, the covenant was with Avram and Sarai together as a unit. This is also why with Lot, as well as with Ishmael and Hagar, we do not see the covenant as being continued through those other lines. The covenant is exclusively with Avram and Sarai, Abraham and Sarah as they are eventually called. And that means Sarai here has to be protected every bit as much as Avram has to be protected. It is not just about him being delivered from Egypt or given wealth from Egypt. It is about her being so important to the story of our people, to the story of the covenant, that God is going to literally do a miracle just for her sake. As always, think of the counterfactual. Did God have to protect her? No. If she was expendable, if Avram could simply get another wife and have the covenant through that other marriage, then Sarai would simply disappear from the narrative here. She was taken to Pharaoh's house and no one ever saw her again, moving on. And then Avram remarries, which, by the way, he does after Sarai dies. But the covenant does not continue through those other lines any more than it continues through the lines of Ishmael, or Lot for that matter. Instead, the covenant continues exclusively through Sarah's line and not exclusively through Avram's line. Just make sure you understand that. Avram has multiple children and relatives that are protected and helped thanks to their connection to God through Avram, but the covenant does not extend through all of Avram's children. The covenant only extends through his children with her, meaning Sarai is more uniquely linked to the covenant than even Avram is. I know that sounds radical, but you have to understand they are a unit when we talk about the creation of the covenant. And we can see that most clearly here in the episode where it is Sarai being protected by God, not Avram. For at that point, Avram is not in danger. He's got his wealth. He is at peace. The danger has passed for him, but Sarai is in the midst of the great danger, and she is the one that is being protected in order that she will be reunited with Avram, and together they will form the next generation through Yitzchak. That will be the continuation of the covenant. As a little bit of an aside, one of the things we see long-term is that it is only when the children from multiple wives are able to work together that the covenant is able to finally survive and thrive in multiple family clusters in the tribes of Israel. Only when Rachel and Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah are able to cooperate does the nation really take off and set the stage for the next part of our national life. Here, it is Sarai that is at the heart of the story. Even if she is mostly left out, even if she is silent in the entire narrative, the miracle is being done for her because she is the cornerstone of the covenant that is to come through Yitzchak. And I think it's just amazing the way the Torah can often highlight someone through a silent presentation of the text around them in a way that they are obviously the linchpin for everything that is happening in the narrative. But you have to notice it. You have to stop and you have to pay careful attention. And as we continue to go through the Torah in this new year of 5783, let's hope we always pay attention to what the Torah says and what the Torah doesn't say, so that we are able to find these incredible insights. Any questions before we wrap up for today? All right, I'm not seeing any, so we are going to go ahead and call that for today. Thank you all, as always, for joining, and I will see you all next time.